Welcome to the Mug Hub podcast, the ultimate platform for all things related to medicine's use, patient care, and the incredible world of pharmacy. We are your hosts, Connor and Sian, and we're thrilled to have you join us today.
Here at the Mug Hub podcast, we're passionate about empowering future pharmacists, expanding your knowledge and igniting your curiosity. Whether you're a first year embarking on your pharmacy journey or a final year getting ready to go out into practice, this podcast is designed just for you.
Across our series, we delve into 4 captivating themes that will take you on an enlightening and entertaining journey. From exploring intriguing clinical topics to showcasing the extraordinary individuals who make up our incredible teams, we're here to unlock the secrets of the pharmacy world.
So grab your favourite mug, settle in, and let's embark on an incredible voyage together. Get ready to be inspired, educated, and motivated as we unlock the vast potential of pharmacy and the vital role it plays in healthcare.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Mug Hub podcast. So today we're joined by Dr Matt Ingram, and Sian is with us as well, unfortunately.
Rude.
And we are here to talk about data analysis and presentation of data in your projects.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
It sounds very much all right, if that's all right with you, Matt.
Sounds good to me.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Have we got questions? How would we
We've
start?
got some questions. Well, I guess one of the, so we're talking specifically to our fourth years here, but it will also relate to any other students on the course and thinking about what you do when you get a set of data.
So I think at this stage, our fourth year students are at the point where they're either collecting data, so they've thought through the project question, their project questions, their research questions. They've thought of the most appropriate methodology. They're potentially either completed collecting data or are in the process of collecting data and are now starting to hopefully think about how am I going to present this data in my final report, in my poster for dissemination to everybody else. So I just wondered, depending on the types of projects that come up, if we could get some insight in how you would start looking at that data set or start to piece together what it is that you should be doing with that data.
Or the question that I have often got in the past, I actually get it less often now, but how do I analyse my data?
Okay. ...
question mark.
What do I do?
What do I do?
I'm scared.
Matt, I've got data. What do I do with it?
I think, first of all, don't panic.
Oh, okay.
That would be
I
my...
wanted to panic.
You wanted to panic.
Yeah.
I could feel that, but we're not going to panic.
Okay.
I suppose the overriding thing is, has somebody done something similar before? Is there a body of literature out there where the data is presented in a very similar way that you can use as a guide to present your research findings?
Okay.
And if there isn't, and you really want to do something avant-garde, I would definitely check with your supervisor. That would definitely be my...
Would you? Yes. Well, I think that's generally just good advice with the projects. It's your supervisor who's marking it. So if they're happy with it, then you know you're on the right track, I guess.
I think it kind of further solidifies the understanding the literature that's already out there, that you might find something that answers a similar question or had a similar methodology but isn't the same question, that you can present similar data. So I think that's a really good point to raise, that look at something that looks interesting to you, or they've done things like that, and then work backwards with your supervisor about how you get to the presentation of data that way.
Yeah, for sure. My sort of personal gripe is I hate it when you see a figure or a graph or whatever it might be, and you can't work out exactly what it's trying to tell you just from the legend. I always think a figure should stand on its own. And we've all got horror stories of when we were taught in the past. And going back to the 90s when I was at university, they used to have to cut out the graphs from one package and paste it into another. So literally with a pair of scissors. That's how old I am. So that always stuck in my mind. So on the graphical package, you had to get the figure right and the legend right to go into your other report.
I just want to picture this a little bit. So you had printed out your report with your word processor.
Yeah.
Using WordPerfect.
Something like that, yeah.
And then you'd also printed out some graphs using GraphPad.
Yeah, well, actually, some of the instruments at the time were very bespoke, and you'd have You remember like those 70s?
No.
No, okay.
Too
You
young.
remember,
Try again.
remember those 80s sort of black
No.
and white screens where you used to have to draw everything actually in the package? You would then print it out
Yeah.
and you'd have to get your figure right, and that would possibly go in your report or your lab book. So
And you'd have your big kitchen scissors, you'd cut your graph out.
yeah, and you'd
I
stick
actually
it in.
do remember doing that.
Yeah,
On
see.
Word. No, I do remember doing that, and I remember on like WordPerfect or whatever, putting in enough spaces so that when it printed out onto paper, it would be big enough so that I could glue something
Exactly,
onto
yeah.
it.
So
Jeez.
we're not that dissimilar. It's just
No, Connor's just looking
Blimey.
in absolute disgust at us.
But I think it's a really imperative lesson, the fact that you had to get your figures right. You couldn't rely on the fact that you could, put in a draft that wasn't of the right quality and then sort of tweak it at the last minute. It had to be right going in.
Yeah. And the general advice there, that the figure has to stand on its own, is a really good one. And if you can look at a graph and you can explain what it shows, or even better, if you can give it to somebody that you live with or a friend, and they can see what it shows, then it's doing its job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, I'm guessing this still is the case. That figure can then transplant directly into your poster for your presentation.
Yeah, and presumably you don't have to literally cut it out with your kitchen scissors.
I think I'm quite happy in 2024, and I'm quite happy that things have moved on, but it's sort of the old lessons stay with you.
Yeah, they do.
So you talk about, obviously you've mentioned, graphs or the data that you're presenting showing what you want it to show. Is there a set number of graphs or tables that you should present for your report, or is it just kind of up to what's there?
Well, again, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think you've got to work with your supervisor. They're going to have guidance in mind. And just because in your first year you used one system, it doesn't mean it's applicable to your individual project now. So I think, although you've done great reports in your previous years and we want you to take the best learning from them, don't think, well, I've always used this type of graph, that therefore it's going to be applicable in my project. So I think, again, see what's out there, what's similar to what you've done. I'm guessing you're still using instructions for authors for the project, so we're looking at sort of those details there. And most journals now, if you've got your journal style, they've got a sample paper. So our library subscribes to lots of journals, and you can see all the sample papers and see what makes a good publication.
Yeah. And what's right for your data as well. I get
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you've got loads and loads of numbers that you want to present, it might be that it is better to put that into a figure, and sometimes that's better in a table. But yeah, my advice with that is just to do it both ways and see what gives you the clearer picture.
Yeah, I quite like that. And then, because it might change as you're doing your writing style. It might be when you've started doing your project, you think a table's better, but then later on you could swap to a figure.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose if you've done the hard work up front, then it makes it easier.
Yeah, true. Good. Yeah. With software packages and things, is there something that you would recommend using for data analysis?
Personal preference, I like Minitab. I like the way you've got two windows, but
What's so great about two windows all of a sudden?
it's just a personal preference. But again, if I'd no doubt sat through your classes, I'd still be an advocate of SPSS.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So,
Well, I might even move to Jamovi one of these days.
Jamovi's good, yeah. I've also had a play with that.
Yeah.
If you're feeling very flash, you can use R and you can do a bit of coding. You feel like you're sort of getting your hands under the hood. But yeah.
I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? I suppose it's just what you're comfortable using.
Yeah, and I think it's about knowing what your research question is and knowing how you're going to address it.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some students in the past so SPSS, you've done some fantastic sessions.
Fantastic.
But also YouTube has tons of videos available now. So if you've got a package that you want to use, but maybe you don't know how to do certain things, and I think even from an Excel standpoint, we can definitely learn things from Excel on YouTube and understand what it can do before then going to your supervisor. So obviously your supervisor can help you out, but I guess I'm an advocate for YouTube these days.
Yeah, definitely.
You could learn completely new skills through YouTube videos.
Yeah, again, going for the multiple screens. I love having a wide monitor so I can have my package up. I've got my YouTube videos. I can sort of play it at double speed. So,
here's a question. Do you get more points in your projects the more tests you do?
Certainly not.
Oh, okay.
which I guess it's a shame, because if you wanted to get
Yeah,
100
it'd be an
points,
easy
you could
hit,
do
wouldn't it?
yeah. Have
Yeah.
you got 100 t-tests or whatever?
No, but in a way that's a serious question, because I think
Yeah.
that there can be a sort of thought that if you've done more tests, then you've kind of worked harder, therefore you should get a better mark.
I suppose the counterpoint of view is, though, if you're having to demonstrate your outcomes with lots of graphs, then you haven't got a clear outcome and you're not communicating that well. And I'm sure, again, Wendy's all over it with a marking scheme on my studies. So I'm sure it is about communicating in a precise and coherent manner. And that there will be a judgment call. For some projects, it might be 4 figures. For some, it might be a different number.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That it's got to relate back to the research question that's come out of the introduction and background. So a clear story that's told throughout it. And if you then find a whole ream of different tests and graphs in the results that you weren't expecting to see after reading the introduction, then that's not a clear message.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
I like that, the story of the project write-up and making sure that results match what you've talked about earlier and then discussed in the conclusion, because you don't want to lose something that you've talked about earlier on that you then don't present in your results. Similarly, the other way around, you said you don't want to present things in your results that were never written about earlier. Because again, when we're reading papers, if there's stuff in there that you're like, where has all this come from? It doesn't make sense. I think as second supervisors, that are the first time we're seeing these projects is reading the final report and looking at the posters. You know, if something doesn't make sense, we kind of lose a bit of confidence in the student understanding what it is they've done.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the story can come after you've analysed the results. I mean, it's probably not the proper way of doing science, is it? But
well, I suppose you could argue that the introduction is really introducing what you found, and maybe you've not cognizant enough to be able to do that introduction till you've actually done all your analysis. So I don't see any harm with writing a draft introduction, doing all your analysis and going back saying, is this introduction really introducing my project?
Yeah. That is a different way of thinking about it than I've thought about it, because I've quite often struggled with that. You know, the theory of science is that your introduction, you do your lit review, you come up with a hypothesis, then you go and design your study and collect your results, and it supports it or it doesn't. But I like the idea that actually what you're introducing is your findings.
And again, I think that comes back to your journal choice, doesn't it? Because hopefully the students will be looking and thinking about their journal choice in conjunction with their supervisor, that will have different instructions for authors. And those guidelines, and they are guidelines, are quite good at illustrating what they want from an introduction.
Yeah.
And some will do it exactly as you described. It's about the sort of hypothesis beforehand. You know, you're below the truth and you're going to present the truth. Others will have a different take. So again, that fits in with seeing what the instructions are and can you sort of fit to that mold.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you think there's a big difference in terms of lab-based projects in the way you analyse data and report it from maybe more audits or meta-analyses? Is it the same rules that apply for each of them?
I would say so, yeah. There's the same marking scheme. And again, it's all about attention to detail in my mind if you look at the marking schemes.
Okay.
So although a meta-analysis may have one statistical method compared to, I don't know, if you're doing a formulation type thing, that'll have a different statistical method. It's all about have you applied the right tools for that project.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So we're always looking for appropriate use of statistics, regardless of what the statistical test is, and that it's appropriately being written up and the right values and numbers have been put in.
Definitely.
Yeah. Good.
If a project hasn't required the use of any statistical analysis, does that mean they're going to get a poorer grade?
Are you thinking of an art project,
Well, no,
Connor?
I'm thinking more of things like the clinical audits, where we're just, have you met the standard or not, and then talked about. There's probably not going to be the same sort of data analysis as there might be in, say, maybe some of the lab reports or in some of the meta-analysis. I mean, is that going to kind of deter grades? Or
I would say no. I think it's all about have you again, you'll have guidelines for doing the clinical audits about have you used those guidelines in a sensible and professional manner. So, because again, you could argue it's poor practice to use statistics when you don't really have need for them. So, you know, it's the old line, is it lies, damn lies and statistics. So if you're just thinking, oh, all my friends have got 3 sort of graphs from SPSS, I'm going to have 3 graphs as well.
Exactly. I think it would come back to that, is the comparator between each student and what the projects are that they're doing. Actually, like you said, maybe the stats isn't relevant in the topic that you're doing.
And I think one thing...
I just want to say something.
Go on.
The descriptive statistics are still statistics. So
Yeah.
using the mean, the percentage, that's still statistics.
Okay.
But yeah, you don't necessarily have to have significance testing and p-values.
Okay.
But even you didn't, like Matt says, as long as it's appropriate what you're doing, you wouldn't even necessarily need numbers, would you, if you were doing a purely qualitative
Yeah,
project?
if you look at looking at people's perceptions maybe, or sort of doing some theme
Yeah,
studies.
like focus group stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're doing grounded theory projects, I guess some of our colleagues will be doing those, won't they? So
They may well be. Yeah. And then we might see no numbers at all, which could be completely fine. Obviously not fine if you're doing a meta-analysis, which is all based on numbers.
And I guess the tricky one for all of us is it's easier sometimes just to jump on your messenger group and ask a friend rather than looking in the instructions and going to the module handbooks and my studies. And I think we're all a bit guilty of using the socials in that way. But I suppose ideally we'd want people to clear their minds and not use their socials and go for the instructions for authors and those type of things. But I do realise it is tempting just to say, oh, what have you done on this graph? And
Yeah. Well, that's the easier way, I guess. Or, well, it's convenient, isn't it? Yes, and I'm guilty of doing those things
exactly.
too.
Yeah, I couldn't. I'm in my glass house, so I'm not going to throw any stones, that's for sure.
Good. I don't want any thrown my way. Is there a sort of generic approach that people should take to data analysis? Is it, would you, like I advise my students when they've done like survey-based analysis anyway, is to look at everything. Is just to get a good feel for the data, understand how the data's distributed, have a good idea about, you know, sort of those descriptive statistics, know how people have responded to each of the questions, look at it graphically, look at it numerically before you start then like fine-tuning it. And
No, I think you're right, Sian. I mean, I think if you think back to probably our very earliest thing we've done with students, we get them to do calibration graphs. And thinking back when we sort of talk to them about how you'd analyse that data, we always plot X against Y. And then the last thing you do is put the regression curve in. So
Yeah.
I think it's always about, I think you're right, in that situation, you do your scatter graph and then do your analysis.
yeah.
So I
And I guess
completely agree with that.
Yeah, and that's going to help you when it comes to poster day as well, if you understand the data better because you've explored it. Even if you're not presenting all of those things that you've looked at, you'll have a better understanding of it.
So it's that old classic, isn't it? Hard work pays off later sort of thing, where it's
so annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so annoying.
Why can't no work pay off or laziness pay off one day?
Or pressing the stats button to generate.
That'd be so nice.
Yeah, so I think if you can put that hard work in at the beginning, it will help you when it comes to your posters and future work as well, I guess, because this won't go away. There'll be things you'll need to do in your future.
Oh, yeah. So you might actually be learning some techniques and tools that you might go on to use in your future career.
Yeah, 'cause who knows what this next generation students will do. Maybe it's further research. Maybe their professional practice will require. They might choose to do a specialist MSc. So.
Yeah.
So again, it's another pitch for that hard work pays off later, but
yeah, and maybe worth remembering the software packages that you've used or that students have used in analysing their data and putting it onto a CV.
definitely.
Got some experience of using SPSS. Minitab, your fave.
Yeah, it's a personal favourite.
That's all right, you can have it.
But I know the pharmacologists like GraphPad. Which,
Yeah, I've heard that rumour.
yeah.
I've heard that about that lot.
Yeah, I have. Any advice that you would give to students around statistics that we've not covered? Or data presentation or analysis?
I think with all of it, it is about just that keeping calm and don't let you fall into the trap of saying, oh, I can't do statistics, because we can all do statistics. And it's not a case of you're doing a statistical exam. It's about thinking about what is the right tool for your question.
Yeah.
And I guess ask for help early. With that you don't want to do the classic 2 days before my project goes in. Any idea what? So I think, chat to your supervisors and possibly yourself, because I know you've taught them the stats.
I have. And do you know what that? And I'm gonna say something now. It's not that rare. The best emails that I get around that when people are asking for help are the ones that have clearly laid out what the question is. So where people said, this is my research question. This is the data that I've collected. I'm not sure how to do X. I'm not sure how to answer this research question. I'm not sure what statistical test I could use. Can you advise me? That kind of thing I can deal with, and I can deal with quite easily, as I'm sure you can, over email. But the ones where it's a bit more panicky, or I just don't know what to do, then that requires a meeting, which can take a bit of extra time. And so, actually sitting down and thinking out, what do I want to know from the data? What does the data look like? Then the next steps can fall a bit more naturally, I think. Yeah,
because in some ways it's a bit like a jigsaw, isn't it? If you've sort of got your borders for your jigsaw laid out and you're not sure what the picture is in the middle, then at least you've got that really good starting point.
Exactly.
But again, it's back to hard work pays off a bit later, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I guess that's the theme of this podcast, isn't it? Hard work pays off a bit later.
Do you know what? That does come up quite a lot. I think pharmacists are quite hardworking. That's what I'm learning.
Definitely.
Not you and me, Matt.
No, afraid not.
No.
Awesome. Is there anything else that's on your list that we've not talked about?
I think you've covered most things on my list. I think we just wish them all luck and just, again, just stay off the socials. Please read the instructions for authors, because it's all laid out for you.
Yeah. And also the module handbook.
Wendy's
another favourite
done
an awful lot of work to make sure that that's right in there. So if you've not read that, you might not know where you're going.
Yeah, it's a bit. We're all a bit guilty of it. You get the IKEA flat pack, and you look at the instructions and think, "No, I'll have a go at this." And then,
I think you're more guilty of that than the average person.
I probably am more guilty of that. Yeah. So I do completely relate to. I don't want to read instructions, but after many years, going back to our earlier start where we were talking about what we had to do in the dark ages, I'm now an advocate of just following the IKEA instructions.
Yeah. I also really like the advice of looking at a paper that has been published in your area and just looking at the style of the conventions that are used in presenting the data, because quite often it's hard to know, if I've put a mean in, should I put a standard deviation or a standard error or variance? And different disciplines will do it differently.
Oh yeah, if you think about pharmacologists, they love standard error of the mean, whereas if you think about the pharm side projects, because you've got effectively lots of molecules. If you think about Avogadro's number, you can get away with standard deviations in pharm, so you don't need standard error of the mean to take account of biological variation. So there's lots of discipline shifts, and I suppose it is their first time of doing it, so therefore why not see what's best practice in your area?
Yeah I think that's very sound advice, and maybe gives you a bit more confidence as well. If you can see what the final product could look like or should look like, then it's an easier path to follow. Nice. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both for your time.
Oh, thank you for your time. All right.
All sorted.
And that brings us to the end of another captivating episode of the Mug Hub podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and took away valuable insights that will fuel your passion for pharmacy.
Remember to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for future episodes where we continue to explore fascinating clinical topics, introduce you to incredible individuals, and enhance your skills to bridge the gap from bench to bedside.
If you've any questions, topic suggestions, or you'd like to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us via our social media platforms or send us an email.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep engaging with your studies. Thank you for joining us at the Mug Hub podcast.